Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. As always, thank you for tuning in to the show. The college football season started this past weekend, and the NFL is right around the corner coming up this weekend. And just when you think, well, it's like, all right, we're going to gear up for the season, nothing big's going to happen. Something big happened, and that is a trade between the Dallas Cowboys and Green Bay Packers, sending Micah Parsons, all everything, a defensive player for the Cowboys, in his prime still, who was looking for a new contract, sending him off to Green Bay in exchange for defensive tackle Kenny Clark and 2 first-round picks. So, decent little haul for the Cowboys. I always feel like anybody who comes with an NBA lens, they kinda have to treat trades differently there in the NBA versus the NFL. But to talk about this trade and what it means for the Cowboys and just kind of some big picture stuff is my guy. He's been on here before. You guys know him, Aaron Ball. And let me list out the resume real quick. Of course, the host of Tacos and Touchdowns. He also contributes FanSided and Sideliner Sports, reporting on the Texas Longhorns football team, which unfortunately took a loss against Ohio State this past weekend. We talked about it before he joined, and the Dallas Cowboys, which is what we're talking about today. So, Aaron, thank you so much for joining me. How are you, man?
Yeah, appreciate you, Omar, for having me on your show. Yeah, and I picked the two teams that are gonna just pull all the little hair follicles out of your head. But it's fun to it's fun to talk about the Longhorns and Dallas Cowboys. But definitely excited to talk about this big trade that happened where it basically changed how we were going to talk about. But the Dallas Cowboys, they always gonna keep you on your toes.
There are two entities in sports that are just so massively interesting. The Cowboys are always kind of in the news cycle. And Texas, for so long, it's been really ever since Vince Young left. It was, when is Texas going to be back? And there's so many moments where everybody thought, maybe this is it. Maybe Quinn Ewers is going to be the guy who takes us to the promised land. And now it's Arch Manning, the chosen one, so to speak. And that's a lot going on with in Austin there with the Longhorns. But they got a good team, and I think they'll be just fine, even after the loss. But let's dive into this trade, Aaron. So we laid it out already. Micah Parsons, who's, yeah, still in his prime, allegedly, right? 26, 27 years old, was looking for a new deal, gets shipped to Green Bay, and as soon as the trade happens, he gets signed for the I think it's the most for a non-quarterback in NFL history. And ironically, shortly after that, Deron Bland is re-signed by the Cowboys. So it's kind of like, interesting. So, from your perspective, as somebody who's a fan of the team and also who covers the team, what does this mean in terms of their direction? Like, what's the plan here now that they've traded Micah?
Yeah, when I seen the trade happen, it was like literally on a Thursday. I was in traffic and I see a notification. I'm like, okay, this can't be true. And then I see Adam Schefter rap sheet. I'm like, okay, it's really happening. And then
Right.
when I finally had some time, I'm like, okay, I seen the trade happen. So they got 2 first-round picks and Kenny Clark, still a really dominant one tech for this team, for the Packers for almost 10 years and doesn't really miss any games. And one of the things he brings to the team, he's a stop run defender, which we needed. But I I was still a little upset because this debacle between Jerry and his agent. When is are they gonna? He's gonna be back? No, he's not. He doesn't want to be here. We're like, okay, it's probably gonna eventually happen. But when you seen the trade actually happen, I'm like, oh, it's actually happening. But when looking at this team, is they want to stop the run and we did sign some good quality edge rusher and drafted one, and Donovan Ezra-Rockley brought Dante Fowler back to the team. But they're not going to bring the same effect of like as a pass rusher as a Micah Parsons. But I believe they're going to be a better run defender as long as Kenny Clark remains healthy on this team. But I'm surprised about the Ron Bland re-signing, but I'm glad they did it before he shows out next year. That contract would have been a lot higher than it was this year. So I know a lot of people say it was a little high when it comes to the contract, but if he had balled out this year, that contract would have been a lot bigger. But I'm saying that this team is getting younger, but they want to add veteran prowess to this team, and they definitely on defensive line because it's a lot of guys in their between like their second or third year in this league, and the only one that was older on the team was a Solomon Thomas, who they who they signed that was connected with Aaron Whitecott, and then you bring back Dante Fowler to the team. Now adding the Kenny Clark, now you got a good blend of veterans and youth on this team. So I think it's a good addition. And then we get two first rounders. Maybe I'm being a little so. Maybe we could have got throw in could we have got a third round in there just to
Mhm.
add more to it because of the type of player Micah Parsons, the impact he has been on for this defense. But I don't hate the trade. It just I wish we kind of could have kept Micah and just got a really good defensive line in the free agency. But you can't complain now. It already happened. Kenny Clark
Right.
is still a Pro Bowler caliber defensive one tech on this team, which we've been in dire need to have one because this team really hasn't valued defensive line in
Correct.
years.
You know, I hate to make this comparison, but whenever we talk, I always find a way to incorporate the Giants into this. But it feels a little Saquon Barkley-ish to me, because here's this guy still in his prime, looking for a new deal, wants, by all accounts, to stay with the team that drafted him, but the team that drafted him maybe sees it sinking, going in a different direction, and just like, well, this is not the kind of player we can afford to have at this point in time, and we'll just, you know, cook around the margins and be able to do it. The Giants did it last year when they signed Devin Singletary, where it's just like, yeah, he's not Saquon Barkley, but he's good enough, and it feels like a higher version, a richer man's version of that because you guys are not as bad as the Giants were last year, but it feels like they feel like this era is kind of maybe winding down a little bit, and let's start preparing for the future. And the Deron Bland thing felt like peak Jerry Jones to me because he's kind of he's really loyal to his guys that he builds up through the system that they drafted. Obviously, they acquired him, if throughout his whole career, led the league in interceptions, and I think he wanted to take care of him if it was possible. It just didn't seem like he was willing to part with the money that would take to re-sign Micah, but it still looked bad, right? Like it's like, oh, you didn't want to re-sign him, but you hear he signed Deron Blanton was like 92, $96 million deal over 4, and the optics not so great for Jerry, which leads me to the next thing. A lot of people have made these sort of assessments like, oh, Jerry Jones is entering his Al Davis years, right? Where Al Davis towards the end of his life with the Raiders, and he just lost the fastball a bit, lost the eye for talent that he had that built up all those great Raiders teams in the 70s. And he was just going for speed only and just, Jamarcus Russell and all this, it just didn't work. And so do you think that Jerry's kinda lost the plot here a little bit, and he really needs to just have Steven kinda take over full time?
Yeah, it's leaning towards that. And when it comes to Steven, he's more cap. He's like he's not a big spender, but he may at this point compared to him and Jerry, that may be more leaning towards that way because sadly I'm kind of feeling that Jerry Jones is leaning toward that Al Davis type of mindset where
Right.
he doesn't have that eye for talent like he once did. And I think it's more leaning towards giving the reins to Steven. And I believe he's been doing that slowly but surely. I think it's that point in his life where it's going to be more towards going Stephen Jones and then Will McClay, who's basically assessing, finding guys in the draft and everything. I kind of would hope more him leaning more as being the general manager, but it's a family business.
Mhm.
And you see it with the Raiders. Mark Davis is the owner and basically the general
That's the case in the NFL a lot of the times, right? Like, a lot of these things are like family operations. Very seldomly do you have a situation that's kind of like the Rams, right? Where, they're kind of like more of a business venture. A
manager.
lot of this stuff is like you look at the Bears, right? They've been passed down for multiple generations now, from the Hallises to the McCoskeys now. So, it's not unusual. And I feel like, we were talking before last week about the Netflix stock with the Cowboys, which kinda ran as a little bit of it was a Jerry Jones show, and he was, like, propping himself up a little bit. But I think the side benefit here, Aaron, maybe tell me if you agree or not, is, Steven was on there pretty prominently, and you kinda gotta, because everybody's like, "Oh, Steven Jones is his kid, Steven Jones is his kid," and I think the way it's reported, you almost think, like, Steven Jones is this young dude, inexperienced, like, this dude's, like, in his 50s, 60s, and He's been around, like, he has his hand in the pot right now, so and I think would you say that his more frugality with spending has kind of dictated the way they've approached free agency and retaining players and trading for players here over the last 5, 10 years?
Yeah, you could definitely see it more his foot in there because once when Jerry was a part of it, that's when there was no salary cap, so you was just free and grabbing guys and everything. But when that salary cap started coming, I think that's when the frugality of Stephen Jones came in, where okay, we need to be
Mm,
more smart when it comes to okay, we can sign this guy, but we might not re-sign this guy. This guy doesn't fit our capology and everything.
right.
But it happened. There's been some opportunities where it actually worked. It just hasn't led to going us to the Super Bowl. But having a team where, okay, maybe this is the year, but it's just like we can't get past the wild card. We get to the wild card, but we can't go any further than that. That it's
Mm.
like if this frugality could lead us to even going to even to the NFC Championship, I'm not complaining. It just you just want to wish it would just lead towards getting there because it's been we're looking at 30 years right now. It's like we can't even get to the NFC Championship, and I hope,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's interesting, Aaron, sorry to cut you off, but, like, over the last 8 years, like, 2020 was a bad year, they were 6-10. Last year, they were 7-10. Otherwise, since then, they've had winning seasons, 12 win seasons 3 years in a row when McCarthy was there, and it's just they've had success relatively speaking. It's just there's an expectation when it comes to the Cowboys, and it's almost like, there's certain teams that like the Yankees in baseball are like this, right? The expectation's so high, but they also haven't won a World Series in forever, right? And it's just kind of like you have that expectation because you grew up on Aikman, Dion, Michael, Emmett, and then it started to falter. And even like when Roma was there in the early years of Dak, there's still assumption that they're going to be a team that's in the mix. And generally, they have been in the mix. So it's just kind of an interesting spot right now for the Cowboys that they're just kind of like they're almost like an afterthought, I wanna say, right? Like, both of our teams are afterthoughts in the division, let's be clear. Like, the Giants are probably gonna be the bottom of the division this year. A lot of people are not really expecting much from the Cowboys, it's all Commanders and Eagles in the NFC East this year, and it's a strange place for the Cowboys to be, I guess. How do you think the fan base reacts to that?
yeah. It's basically been a lot of you don't hear a lot of fans saying, "Oh, this is our year." We ain't said that in a while. It's kind of like, okay, we're probably going to be the third or fourth best team in the NFC East this
Mm,
year, especially after this. So you're kind of leaning toward maybe we'll be the third best, but Eagles are pretty. It's safe to say the Eagles will probably be the number one in our division because they've been doing things to get better, especially in the draft, making trades that were it just hurts to say that. And then the Commanders are on a high from last year, and you just see them. You don't see anything that where this team could be the second best team in our division, but it's kind of like we're fighting, scratching the claw to be that third best team in our division.
yeah. What's so ironic is, again, I keep on bringing up the Giants, and the Giants have no real basis in this argument, in this discussion, but the vibe difference between Cowboys fans and Giants fans, it's night and day. Like, Giants fans are excited about the future, they're thinking about Malik Neighbors and Jackson Dart,
Yeah.
and this defensive line that should be one of the best in football, let's not talk about the secondary, but it's a defensive line that is supposed to be really good, with Abdul Carter and Dexter Lawrence and Thibodeau and all these guys. And, well, when you go out with the Cowboys, it's just kinda like the sky is falling, right? And it's just an interesting thing, and it just so the mentality. Well, 2 teams that are likely win total-wise gonna be pretty close to each other, right? Like, the Cowboys are probably closer to the Giants in win total than they would the Eagles, I would say, right? And it's just the reality of the situation. And that brings me to the city of Dallas as a whole. I thought about this the other day. As soon my first thought when the trade happened, so obviously you're thinking, what does this mean for the future for the Cowboys? My first thought is, how does the city of Dallas lose 2 generational talents in the same year? How do you lose Luka Doncic at 26 and also lose Micah Parsons at 26? And that's so crazy to me because I don't think it's ever happened. where not only do you lose franchise players from 2 different sports in the same city in the same year, but they're both in their prime, And I'm just like, I mean, do you think, like, Dallas is losing its appeal in that way? Like, people always say, "Well, it's not LA, it's not Miami, it's not New York, whatever." But there's an argument to be made that Dallas is a really good destination for a lot of players, especially in NBA, MLB, and NHL because of the travel stuff. The tax stuff is favorable. The weather's nice, easy to travel to different destinations. There's a lot of reasons to like Dallas, and it's a bustling media market. So, why do you think players are kind of shying away from staying there long term now?
Yeah, I don't know. It's I think it does do a lot of the front office thing is, and then you always hear about what they were saying about Luca and everything. They're saying he's not into getting in shape and everything,
Hmm.
try to find anything just to get him away. And then kind of the stuff in between Micah Parsons or our agent and everything that like we had a deal, but Micah pretty much said nah to it. But when you see it and then when you see it from their perspective as well, you're kinda like, "Do I really wanna go to Dallas?" Yeah, it's nice. I think a lot of players wanna live in Dallas. I don't know if they wanna play in the for Dallas teams, like, okay, that'll be my all-season home, like, I'll stay in Dallas because you see a lot of players that never play for the Cowboys or the Mavericks, but they'll live in Dallas, but
Hmm. You know what it reminds me of, Aaron? It reminds me of the Knicks, and because obviously, I'm a Knicks fan, and for the longest time, we wouldn't be able to get free agents because people love being in New York. It's one of the greatest cities in the world, but they want to play for the Knicks. There's pressure, right? And with the Cowboys, I feel like in the NFL, there's a few franchises that really provide pressure, and the Cowboys are a big one. I think I think the Steelers, when you play for them, there's some pressure there to perform if you don't win a lot of games. So there's the number of teams that there's some pressure to win immediately. I think the Cowboys are right there because they're always in the national spotlight. And that ESPN just loves talking about them, man. Like it doesn't matter if they're 8-9, 7-10. It doesn't matter. They're still a topic of conversation because they get a rating because they became such a huge entity before this, you could watch everything. I mean, think about people who lived in markets that didn't have an NFL team back in the day. They got the Cowboys game because they were America's team right back then. And it's kind of an interesting thing to see players kind of shy away from it. I mean, do you think that the star on the helmet's a little intimidating to guys, or they're just like, yeah, man, how about I just go to the Dolphins instead? Though nobody pays attention to what they're doing down there. Is there any merit to that, or is that just kind of much ado about nothing?
I think there's some merit to it because some players, they just wanna play, and if because we get Dallas Cowboys get more publicity than like the Super Bowl teams. Like the Cowboys could go, like you said, 7 or 10, but they're gonna be the talk of the town from February to whenever. It's like they give like a little bit to like the Super Bowl champ, but all the Cowboys they ain't gonna get this guy, or are they gonna re-sign this guy and all this? But I think that something to deal with a lot of the players not wanting to go. Like some of them don't want to deal with all that all the circus acts you got to deal with being the Dallas Cowboy. It, being back in the '90s, like okay, I want to be a Dallas Cowboy because hey, we're gonna go to the Super Bowl and everything.
Right.
But now it's like we're gonna go to the playoffs, but we might if we're playing against the 49ers, the Packers, it's like there's not a good chance that we're gonna get past that team because those been the pretty much the boogie monster for the Dallas Cowboys for the past 10 years, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't help that your owner's doing a radio hit every week, right? It's bad. It's like if I'm a player, I'm thinking, man, if I'm a DB and I get burned on a route, right? Like, is Jerry going to say some shit in the media, right? And that's a thing that you have to consider. If you go and play for the Eagles, Laurie's not doing that. He's not getting on Philadelphia sports radio. The guy who owns the Commanders, Josh Harris, he's not going on DC radio and saying some stuff about that. Lord knows, John Mara's not saying anything unless it's anything involving Hard Knocks. But it's just kind of like that's another aspect of it. Again, it just feels so much like the Knicks to me, especially like in the 2010s before Leon Rose and Thibodeau were hired. And but yeah, so let's focus on Jerry for a second though. In the documentary, we were reminded of the greatest trade heist to ever exist, which was the Herschel Walker trade. And it led in the fact that they were talking about how he had the option to turn the players into draft picks is insane. That would never happen today, because draft picks are so coveted. But he gets 5 picks and it turns into the core of their foundation in the 90s. And Herschel kind of fizzles out in Minnesota, whatever. And he kind of mentioned the Herschel Walker trade, and it's been kind of relitigated who did it, me or Jimmy Johnson, and because of the documentary. But he kind of brought it up, and it almost made it seem like this was the Herschel Walker trade. And first of all, is he off base for that? And second, do you think that there's a potential, considering what these draft classes might be coming up, that these 2 picks might actually turn into foundational pieces for the Cowboys?
They could be great pieces, but we'll never know until they get on
Of course.
actually be on the field. So I would say to anybody that like how you're saying this maybe possibly a Herschel Walker trade to pump the brakes, because we didn't even expect the Herschel Walker trade to be like how it was to be monumental, where this led to being what, 3 Super Bowls in the '90s and everything. Like it luckily it happened and it worked out for us. I would say just ease up on this trade, comparing it to the Herschel Walker, because like you said, that Herschel Walker trade would never happen in today's time. It's like that happened one time only, and we'll talk about it for years. But like you said, teams covered these draft picks, like the first and seconds and the thirds. These teams are very, very like kill you. Like, okay, this player's got to be like how Micah Parsons. Like, we're lucky we got those two first picks and a Pro Bowl defense tackle. Like, I think it could be a really good trade value for us for the future when getting those first round picks. It just depends on uh, where these draft picks are at. Are they in the 20s, and are close to the 30s, or maybe in the teens? And maybe you find a diamond in the rough in those late 20s with the Packers, and they actually happen to be something well. Hopefully, they're whoever we got doing these with the draft when it comes to our scouting department, our general manager, aka Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones at that park. But I wouldn't say it's close to the Herschel Walker trade. I want to see how it pans out in these next 3 years.
Yeah, I think if not one of these picks, then one of their own picks in these next couple years is gonna be used to draft their next QB. I think, that's kind of a foregone conclusion. I think, Dak's probably towards the end of his time in Dallas, within the next 3 years, and I'm sure they would love to get somebody like Arch Manning in just from a story perspective, but, the next couple of QB classes seem to have really good talent, and you would imagine they would use that. It's the issue with trading with the Packers, because it's why I would have never done a trade with the Spurs during the Duncan era, because they're always good. Like, the Packers don't have losing seasons very often, right? Like, at the worst, they're like 500, and so that means you're, right in the 20s, right? Generally, picking. It's not like making a trade with the Jags or the Cardinals, right? Where there's a good variable, good chance of one of those teams is gonna be bad in a given year, and you end up with a top 10 pick. So that's where I don't see it being Herschel Walker like, because you're not going to be able to. They're not going to be that bad. We even saw it when Jordan Love went out. Malik Willis, who was kind of thrown away by the Tennessee Titans after a year, comes in and wins a couple games for them. They just have a really solid operation there. It hasn't led to a lot of Super Bowls, but they get to the playoffs frequently, and that's not good when you're the trade partner getting their picks, right? Um, so let's kind of double back on something here where we kind of talked about the Cowboys fading into obscurity a little bit. And so I always think there's players for teams that are attractions. When you got Sunday ticket and you want to watch a team, you turn them on because, oh, I want to see this player, right? And you might want to see Christian McCaffrey when you put on the 49ers game, for example, right? And I think like if somebody sees a Cowboys game on, who are they tuning in for? Because they trade their most notable player, probably maybe outside of Dak, I would say him and Mike are really like kind of neck and neck in terms of notoriety. Are you tuning in for George Pickens? Are you still tuning in for Dak? Are you tuning in for whoever they decide to start at running back? Are you tuning in for CD Lamb? Like, what's the appeal, the pull of the Cowboys now for a team that has been so star driven in the past? It seems like they don't really have true stars anymore. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I feel like the main drawing card now is like seeing the wide receiver duo of the CD Lamb and George Pickens, and then maybe seeing like, okay, how does this defense look without Micah Parsons on this team? I think that's gonna be like your week one drawing card and seeing how it pans out and everything. Dak's still a drawing card. Of course, he's the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, but it's seeing how's he gonna look this year? Is he gonna remain healthy? Because like you said, he's probably going to be the quarterback until his contract is out, and then they're probably looking for their future quarterback. They're kind of showing signs of when they traded for Joe Milton, who's got a lot of upside, but is he your QB1 or is he more your future QB2? So it's kind of leaning towards that. But I think it's mainly your trio of offensive guys and like, okay, can they really do something with this running back room of Javonte Williams and Jake Blue and Miles Sanders? And they did improve with this offensive line, getting guys in free agency drafted Tyler Booker, but is he gonna really? Is he gonna? Is Are we looking at the Great Wall of uh, Dallas again? But that time will tell. But I think your drawing card is your wide receiver, your quarterback, and seeing how this defense does without a Micah Parsons. It's kind of more the no name defense that you're kind of trying to figure out. Can this uh, defense pan out, and can Trayvon Diggs get back to who he was, and Deron Bland still be that guy, especially after you get that big contract. So it's trying to find those drawing cards to bring people into the games, but there's a lot of Dallas Cowboy fans, so it's not really a problem. But like
Right.
outside fans, okay, why should I watch this game?
Yeah, I wonder, like, if that lack of appeal is going because even when they were kind of mediocre, like, people still tuned in and wanted to talk about Des Bryant, right?
Yeah.
And it's just yeah, I guess you could say CDs like that, or Pickens is a pretty animated guy, at least he was in Pittsburgh, so maybe that's the guy. But I do find it interesting, like when they're gonna be making their talking points. Because inevitably on your first takes and your first things first and whatever, they talk about Dallas. They just do because it pulls in a rating. And in the past, they've had things to talk like last year, it was all about McCarthy, right? What's going to happen with McCarthy? Now you got Brian Schottenheimer. I just feel like he's about to be a punching bag for the media because a lot of people felt like that was a bad hire, that he's a more of a coordinator, assistant type as opposed to head guy. And so it's an interesting predicament for a team that's just so used to being in the spotlight. It's like when the I make a lot of NBA analogies, this, Aaron, but it's like like before the Lakers got LeBron. Like they had some issue, and I like that in between from when Kobe retired to when they got LeBron. It was just kind of like who's really what am I watching the Lakers for? That kind of thing. And it almost feels like that because you have Dak towards the end of the road and Mike is gone and, you got a couple guys coming back and you just kind of wonder, like who's the face of this team that's so valuable to the NFL. And the good thing for the NFL is that their brand is so strong, they honestly don't really need the Cowboys in that way. Which is crazy to say that the most valuable team in sports isn't needed by its league. That's just the NFL for you. A team from Kansas City dominates the headlines. It's unheard of in any other sport. But just the fascinating thing that's always interested me about the NFL is just kind of like it's more about the brand as opposed to the individual brands of teams. It's more about the league brand, right? Um, let's talk about Parsons specifically. We've talked about we kind of danced around him a little bit, but let's talk about what we can expect with him on Green Bay this year. So they bring him in. They want to fortify that pass rush. Already, people are making the Reggie White comparisons in terms of acquiring him. He switches his number to number one. First time has been worn since Curly Lambeau. I guess that's who the field is named after. So 99 years since somebody wore that number, pretty interesting. So a lot of expectation, right? But he's a guy. He's used to big brands. He went to school, Penn State, played for the Cowboys, and plays for another big brand. Um, I look at this as a risk worth taking for a Packers team that felt like they were one player away last year. How do you read his fit with the Packers going into this year?
Yeah, I think it's a great fit for them. Now you got somebody outside, on the opposite side of Rashawn Gary on this. Yeah, they took a little a dip on when it comes to the run defense, but they upgraded on the pass rush when it comes to that Micah Parsons team. I've seen a lot of Packer fans are not complaining about it. I don't blame them for bringing in a Micah Parsons, all pro type of guy on and off the field. And some people may have their questions about him doing the podcast and thing, but
What do you think about that, Aaron? Like, what's your read on the player podcast while they're still playing?
like, long as they perform at their best, I don't really care. Long as it doesn't take away from you performing on Thursdays, Friday, whatever day that the NFL's got a game and you're playing. I don't see the problem as long as it ain't affecting your main income, and that's playing in the NFL. But if it does, that's when it's a problem. Like, okay, maybe you need to put the mic down for a little bit and to get focused on the main thing. But I don't see the issue with it because most of them are doing like 30 minutes to an hour on their off days, so
Right.
it shouldn't be a problem when it comes to podcasting. Like they have voices just like you and me. They
I
just
mean, it's like when they used to call into sports radio shows. Like,
yeah,
really, like maybe it's a little longer, but like you would think like back in the day, you would have players who or in coaches who have agreements with a TV station. Like I remember when I first moved to Michigan, every now this is a coach, not a player, but same idea, where they would have the coach do an interview on TV with this local sports guy, and that was just part of the agreement. And, if players want to kind of control their messaging in that way, a lot of them are super media savvy now. So, I won't have a problem with it either. I think once you get to like the playoffs, all right, shut it down, because you're just opening yourself up to criticism there, right? Because like if you're talking all this stuff on the podcast and then you go out and you get exposed in a playoff game or at least or a regular season game that decides playoff seeding, then, you're gonna get killed, and why even deal with it, at that point, and, I think the guys just use caution, right? As long as they use caution and they're not, like, giving other teams bulletin board material,
yeah.
you should be fine. Before we get you out here, I guess well, actually, before that, what grade-wise I know it's super cheesy to give grades for trades that you haven't seen what happen, especially with a pick thing, but just conceptually, what do you give the Cowboys a grade for this trade, and what do you give the Packers a grade for this trade?
Okay, when it comes to the Packers, I give them a solid A. They solidify getting a great pass rusher to this team, and for the Dallas Cowboys, right now, I'm gonna give it a C plus until I see what happens on it. We've been in a dire need to get a one tech where it helps out our linebackers, so they're not over there trying to get offensive line. So it's good to have a really good one tech with Kenny Clark, and then we got some future picks. It's just I want to see what these future picks do, and I want to see the impact that Kenny Clark brings to the team, and then I'll probably get a solid B. But I don't hate the trade. It's just I kind of wish it didn't happen the way it did.
Yeah, yeah, it was messy, right, with the agent stuff and, because Jerry, I feel like he's like an old school guy who wants to talk to the player and,
Yeah.
like, be a part of it, and it's just not how business is done anymore, and it's, it's an interesting type of dynamic and it's just different world, and which is why, again, like we said, Jerry probably needs to let Steven kinda take over the reins. I think Steven has a little bit of a better understanding of this sort of stuff than Jerry does at this point, because it was a different world when he got Dion, you see the way he got Dion, and if he tried to do that now, that wouldn't fly, So, um you'll get you out of here though, Aaron. What we talked about all the stuff you're doing at the beginning. There's another venture you're starting or in the process of kind of building up, and it's called TT Sports. And I'm kind of curious if you can just walk us through a little bit of what that's all about.
Okay. for like the past few years when it started toggles and touchdown, I've been kind of doing more Dallas Cowboys centric. I feel like that's kind of been like it's been more like forced in, but I'm like, I wanted to go into a different venture. I wanted to go talking about fantasy football and then correlating like some faith-based things into how they connect and everything. And I feel like that's more of my calling, but I also still want to write because I enjoy writing about sports as well. But Tennessee sports is like this talk. Still going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys a little bit, but just kind of correlating like Bible verses and stuff like that into to football and everything because I think they both have correlations to each other, and I think that's the way our TNT sports is going to be, where I'm going to put some Dallas Cowboys, put some faith based in there, like some verses and stuff. I usually kind of pray about it and everything, like and figure out how they're going to be correlated. But
Can you give me an example, like, how like, an example of how you could think, of something would kinda correlate into between because faith and football are always kinda intertwined, especially in, like, high school football culture and stuff like that, so, like, how do you if you could give me, like, an example, what that would be like?
it's like when you're going through like some trials and tribulation. That was actually one of my first episodes. It's the way you handle it and putting your faith in Christ and kind of connecting that style like some because like when it comes to athletes they go through it's not always sunshines and rainbows and everything. It's like how did they handle these situations and like finding examples like you see videos of like certain players how they handle certain situations they go through and everything. So just kind of correlating those together in ways. And I try not to make it too for it feels like it's cheesy and corny and stuff.
Right.
I try to I try to do my due diligence. That's why I don't try to do shows like on Mondays or Tuesday. I want to take my time. They usually be on Wednesday and Thursday. So 'cause I want people to enjoy it where they're like, "Oh, you just trying to force it in." I'm like, no, I kind of want to lean it towards. And when it comes to the fantasy football thing, I kind of want to like, okay, these are the guys like you should add and or you should like okay, sit this person down and everything. So it's gonna be pretty fun. Yeah, I know it's a lot different from what I did for these past years, but I'm for the challenge and I'm excited about it. But we're definitely going to be doing the second episode this Thursday. So after this show, definitely going to start looking into okay how this show's gonna be. But we're gonna do the Dallas Cowboys versus Eagles preview. I know it's a Thursday, so it's gonna be early before the game and everything. But definitely excited to what TNT Sports is gonna be.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept because you look at others, maybe more so than any other professional athletes, are more in tune with their religion and theology than others are, and I think this, I fully admit I'm not a very religious person, but I always felt like football is the closest thing. It's like synchronized near death experiences, right? Like, it's violent, you're getting hit, um, injuries are much more likely, concussions happen, so that's the type of thing where you understand why they have such a strong, resolute belief in the higher power because any day on the football field, who knows what could happen. We saw a pretty bad injury during the preseason, right? With I think it was the Lions and the Falcons, and, you saw a group of players kind of pray a prayer circle around them. And there's like a brotherhood aspect, but a connection there, man, and so I think it's a very interesting venture. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about it because it is so different. And it resonated with me because, as you know, I do writing and stuff. And I always try to find a different angle when it comes to involving sports stuff. Sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's technology, pop culture. Like, right now, I'm working on 2 pop culture centric sports pieces. Why? Because that's what I wanna do, And so, but if you feel it's your calling, that's awesome, and, thanks for sharing that with
So
me and with anyone who's listening right now. But with that, Aaron, I've taken too much of your time. I always enjoy our conversations, but if, somebody is looking to follow you, where can they find your stuff at?
they can find it they can find me on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. At Aaron TALKS F so FB. So it's just basically Aaron Talks Football. And then everything else is still Tacos and Touchdown. Trying to get the switch the handle to TNT Sports on Facebook. If it's Tacos and Touchdown Live on Facebook, and on Instagram it's Tacos and Touchdowns. But definitely appreciate you for having me on the show, Omar. I definitely realized that's a great time. So no, you didn't take a lot of my time. I enjoyed these conversations and everything for sure.
Appreciate that so much, Ben. And as always, thank you everybody at home or wherever you are for tuning in to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. If you liked our podcast, you can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And you could also catch some of our clips on Instagram, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok. Aaron, thanks again. You can all follow all of Aaron's pages. I encourage you to do so if you like the NFL and college football, and make sure to give him a look whenever you're looking for coverage on that. Those will all be all below in the description. But until next time, I'm your host, Omar Zaran, and this has been another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast.